Hi,
There we go.
Perfect.
my name is Joe. I'm brand new to IHC. I've only been working in the field for a year. Could you just speak a little bit about like how they handled testing before and then like after in terms of like LDT, just like a summary about like that whole, I guess, controversy?
We don't really know the answer.
How we handle testing before and after LDT?
Like, you know, because everyone's talking about like the FDA, like now you have to submit LDTs to FDA. Like I'm like a total newbie, so
Yeah.
it would be great if, I don't know if this is like inappropriate for this, but just
Well,
like
okay.
how before and after.
Right, so what occurred many years ago was that FDA has authority over vendors who produce medical devices. And an antibody is considered, or a DNA probe or whatever is considered a medical device. So FDA has authority over that, but they're primarily concerned with vendors who manufacture those and then sell them to us or to laboratories. Okay, so, and then CLIA, on the other hand, regulates laboratories and sets up the regulations for doing things like validations, or who can work in the laboratory, or who's a testing personnel, or something like that. So what FDA did was they, as far as histopathology goes, is they essentially used what they called their discretionary authority to essentially say that most antibodies they're not going to regulate. So if there's several classes of medical devices. Class 1 they call exempt. Okay, so they don't have to be regulated. Because they're used in conjunction with many other tests to come to a diagnosis, so they're considered very low risk. In other words, if it's negative or doesn't work right, it's not a huge problem for making a diagnosis. They can do it over or whatever. And then there's class 2, which is, in class 3, which are more standalone type things, like a prognostic or therapeutic antibody. We've had maybe a dozen of those. They're used as standalone diagnostic tools to guide therapy and prognosis for a patient. And so they're basically, that one test decides a huge amount of treatment for a patient. But FDA has pretty much, I mean, the vendor has to go through pre-market approval for those. In other words, they have to do clinical trials, they have to do all kinds of things to prove that it works. But then the laboratory is still, all they have to do is validate it. They buy the antibody, they do their own validation, they use the vendor's validation, they may use the vendor's kits, and they do their thing. And the FDA has never touched laboratories. They never said that they're going to regulate laboratories because they don't manufacture anything. Okay, they don't produce the antibodies, they don't produce the kits, they don't make the machines or anything. But now FDA has come back, and it's primarily because of genetic testing, which is, you know, genetic tests are very easy to make. Now you can synthesize DNA, you can synthesize probes, you know, thousands of them a day if you want. And so laboratories all over the country have been using genetic testing that they develop in-house, they use in-house. Sometimes they have other people send them stuff, they test it, they're essentially selling it. And so now, and that kind of prompted FDA to start looking at testing, regulating laboratories as manufacturers, because all these laboratories were producing their own tests. So anyway, with this final rule, what they've come down and said that they're also going to regulate histopathology laboratories as part of that. And there's kind of two sets of that. One is if you do it manually, they're not going to bother you. In other words, if you do all the steps manually, they're not going to bother you. But if you have an automated machine applying the reagents, then they're going to call you a manufacturer.
Which makes no sense.
And so now you're going to have to eventually register as a FDA manufacturer, which costs money, and then you're going to have to list all the antibodies that you sell or that you use in your laboratory, and then they're going to try to, then what they want you to do is give them information about how well those work. Okay, so before we didn't have to bother with all of that, now we're going to have to bother with it. But it doesn't come into effect till May 2025, And if you were using those products before May 2024, they're not going to count those. In other words, you could still use those if you don't modify them at all. Any new antibodies or probes, then you're going to have to go through their LDT program. But when reading through the Federal Register, the comments and some of the answers that FDA gave to the comments, it sounds like they may give some more discretionary authority to class 1 type antibodies. In other words, they may only require minor reporting things and record keeping, which is not trivial for FDA. But for class 3, like all the prognostic therapeutic, they may, even though you buy it from a vendor, you use their machine, you use all their kits, they may still force the laboratory to go through FDA regulatory approval, which will cost money and time and effort. So anyway, that's kind of the difference. Before we weren't bothered by FDA, now we're going to be bothered by FDA.
Thank you.